In the studio is Shadow Schools Minister Mike Kane and Conservative MP Chris Philp. Listening to that, Chris Philp, if you look at the figures themselves from the government, there is no real terms increase when you take into account rising costs for these schools and increased pupil numbers.
Well, up until 2015, real terms per pupil funding was rising. There was a 2-year period from 2015 to 17 when it did go down a little bit, and those are the pressures we're hearing about. However,
but
from
they're
April,
extreme, aren't they, those pressures?
Well, however, from this April onwards, that's 2 months' time, extra money is being put in. So just to give you the numbers, the budget this year is 41 billion. Next year, it's 42.4, and the year after that 43.5. So it is being protected and it is going up.
But
from
the
here
point
on
is,
in.
yes, but you're still ignoring the fact that the point is it's not enough when compared with the parallel rising costs of running these schools and teachers' wages and salaries and increased pupil numbers.
So if you take those funding increases I just laid out and you adjust them to account for increases in pupil numbers and inflation, schools will either be protected or see slight increases. So that is being addressed going forward. It's also instructive to look at international comparisons because of the 32 OECD countries, we come 6th out of 32 for education funding, ahead of France, ahead of Germany, ahead of Japan and ahead of Australia. So those international comparisons are quite illuminating as well.
So why are there schools like Jules White's who are having to make the sorts of cuts that actually led to many people making this the issue that they did vote on in the election and it wasn't for the Conservatives?
Well, that's right. And I think we recognised over the summer that there was an issue here because of that 2015 to 17 period. And that's why in September
we announced the
extra 1.3 billion, and that will hit classrooms in April of this year in just a couple of months' time. But also what's important here isn't just the amount of money put in, it's the results that are achieved. And over the last 7 years, 1.9 million more children are in good and outstanding schools than 7 years ago. So yes, the money is important, but the outcomes are important too. And the outcomes in our schools are very, very good indeed.
What do you say to that?
Well, Chris hasn't taken into factor that there's more children in our school system, that school inflation is running ahead of ordinary inflation, pension contributions, the apprenticeship levy, and the fact is that the National Audit Office are telling us, Joe, that this government is taking £2.7 billion out of the system from 2015 to the end of the year.
Well, Chris Philp has admitted that there was actually a lag in funding for those 2 years. What do you say about the results and the numbers of children that are in better schools, according to the government?
Well, 1.9 million children in better schools is a statistic. Those schools were all identified actually as coasting schools under the last Labour government who put the money into those schools. So they're dining out on our record with that. But if you look at the Key Stage 2 SATs, the differentiation between those on free school meals doing well, the huge inequalities going up, and your phonics have gone back. And Michael Gove and Justine Greening clearly made the PISA targets, the international targets that we compare our standards with.
Well, Mike,
in 2010, let me just finish this point, and we are going down the PISA indicators.
Well, is that the case when it comes to maths, English and science?
No, well, our schools are obviously and measurably better now than they were 7 years ago.
Well, hang on a second, but you need to give the evidence for that. In what way, if you're using...
Because according to Ofsted, 1.9 million children are in good and outstanding schools. That's gone from 67% to 89%. But Mike mentioned inequality, and I'm proud to say that in the last 7 years, the attainment gap between children from deprived backgrounds and average backgrounds has narrowed by 10%. So those children from deprived backgrounds are doing better now than they were 7 years ago. And that is the measure of a compassionate, effective education system.
Well, it all depends, of course, which measures you use. But why is it that some schools in England receive 50% less money than an identically sized school?
Well, it's really for historic reasons. I mean, these funding formulas go back some decades.
No, but you put out a new funding formula that should have addressed this.
And that's right. So let me finish. That will come into force from April of this year. Now, as the piece said, it's going to migrate over a period of about 3 years. So it's not going to be like flicking a switch where everything changes in 1 year. As he said, for schools who are underfunded, which actually includes secondary schools in Croydon, they'll have their funding increased by 3% a year over a number of years, over 3 or 4 years, until they've caught up. So my secondary schools in Croydon, as it were, deserve about a 10 to 12% increase, and that'll come in over a 4-year period.
And what are they supposed to do in the meantime? I mean, if you're hearing about curriculum being having slimmed down, if parents are being asked to contribute money to their local state primary and secondary schools because of these budget cuts on those 2 years and going forward until the new funding formula is bedded down, what are these schools supposed to do?
From April of this year, so from 2 months' time, that extra money will start to hit schools. So the Croydon secondary schools that I represent will get an above-inflation per pupil increase in about 2 months' time.
Right.
So more money, and it'll accelerate after that.